Welcome to the lecture for Basics of Biblical Aramaic, Chapter 2, the Aramaic Vowels. Now, like the consonants, both Hebrew and Aramaic share a vowel system, and so what we already know for Hebrew vowels is going to apply for Aramaic vowels. Then at the end, there will be a few things that we tweak that are going to be unique to the Aramaic system. So let's begin by looking at what you know when it comes to your study of the vowels by its relationship to Hebrew. Look at your screen with me. Aramaic, like Hebrew, uses the same set of basic vowel symbols. There are 10 different vowel symbols used in 11 different slots represented on your screen. These vowels appear in 5 vowel classes and 3 vowel categories. The 5 vowel classes are A, E, I, O, and U. The 3 vowel categories are long, short, and reduced. You'll notice that there's not a vowel symbol for every slot available, but that doesn't matter. You already know the vowels and the vowel symbols from your study of Hebrew. Let's look at the long vowels. There's the comets, the tsere, and the holum, the A, the E, and the O vowels. The short vowels are pathic, sagol, hirik, kamet hatuf, and kibbutz. Finally, the reduced vowels are hatef pathic, hatef sagol, and hatef kamet. Before you move on from this particular chapter, you must have memorized the vowel symbol, the vowel name, and the pronunciation value for each symbol. If you're unfamiliar with the names or the sounds of any of the vowels, you need to go back and review. But hopefully this will be review for everybody. Look at your screen again with me. One of the things you'll also notice, and that's worth pointing out, as I said, there are 10 symbols, but 11 different slots. That's because, remember that the comets and the kamet hatuf share an identical symbol, but have 2 different values. The comets represents the long A sound, like the A in father, ah, but the kamet hatuf represents the short O sound, like the O in got, ah. They're very close in terms of how they're actually represented in English, but they're distinct in Hebrew and Aramaic. Now here's the thing. The kamet hatuf occurs in very discrete environments and in not very many instances either in Hebrew or Aramaic, only in closed, unaccented syllables. So in most cases, you'll be looking at a kametz, not a kamet hatuf. So if you're confused or if you don't know, you should always lean towards guessing kametz, long A. And then if you find yourself in a closed, unaccented syllable and you can confirm that, go with the short O sound. But that's just one of those features that it's a review item that you need to kind of reinforce before you move on. But I know you can do it. In addition to the 10 basic vowel symbols that we just saw, Aramaic also uses 9 different vowel letters. Look at your screen with me. In the same 5 classes, A, E, I, O, and U, you will see 3 different sets of vowel letters. Vowel letters written with hey, vowel letters written with wow, and vowel letters written with yod. All of these vowel letters that you see here are the same vowel letters that you'll see with your Hebrew studies. And you'll see that in the first category, vowel letters written with hey, you have them in the classes A, E, and O, the kametz hey, the sagol and tsere hey, and the holum hey. In the second category, you'll see vowel letters written with wow, holum wow, and shurik. And then in the third category, you'll see sagol and tsere yod, and then hirik yod in the E and I categories. None of this should be new material for you. But let me just comment on 2 things about vowel letters that are helpful for review that apply both to Hebrew and Aramaic. The first is this. Vowel letters written with yod and vowel letters written with wow are called historically long or unchangeably long. That is, when they appear in a word, they resist change at all costs. They don't like to reduce, so they call them unchangeable. Okay? Now, the reason that's important is because you know from your study of Hebrew that Semitic words like Aramaic and Hebrew words love to change their form when they appear in different environments. When we have these vowel letters, they will resist that change. And so sometimes it can be tricky to know what a word is doing because it hasn't changed its form. The only thing to be aware of that can be tricky, again, here, is that sometimes vowel letters are written defectively. Now, by defectively, I don't mean that the letter is written incorrectly. By defectively, I mean that the vowel letter is written without the consonant. So the hirik yod will be written simply with hirik, or the holum wow will be simply written with holum, without the yod or the wow. Now, you've seen that in Hebrew, and it also appears in Aramaic. It shouldn't cause you too much trouble, but when I make reference to defectively spelled vowel letters, now you'll know what I mean. They're vowel letters written without the consonant. The next thing that's important to review for vowel letters relates to vowel letters written with hey. Vowel letters written with hey appear only at the end of a word. So you'll see, for example, kamete or tserehe, and those vowel letters appear only at the end of a word, never at the beginning, never in the middle, only at the end. Now, hey is a weak consonant in Hebrew. It's one of those guttural consonants, okay? And so whenever an Aramaic word takes something at the end, it takes a suffix, and you want to add something to the word, or you want to inflect the word in a particular form, that hey is going to do one of two things. It's either going to strengthen to a tau, or more commonly, it's going to drop off entirely. So what this means is that you'll see words, lexical forms or dictionary forms of words, you'll memorize them, and you'll memorize them with a hey in the final root position. But remember, those final letters are actually vowel letters, and those vowel letters can drop off. And so sometimes you'll be looking at a word with two root letters, and you'll have to reconstruct the fact that there used to be a hey at the end. Now, you've seen this in Hebrew, and this is a very common feature in Aramaic as well. And by studying that feature now, when you encounter it later, it won't be such a trouble to you. It's one of those features of the language that are just difficult at first to grasp, but once you see it over and over again by frequency of exposure, it becomes second nature to you. And hopefully after a year of Hebrew, this should be something well situated in your mind, and it shouldn't give you too much trouble. In addition to the 10 vowel symbols and the 9 vowel letters, Aramaic also employs a number of other pointing symbols used for spelling words. These symbols are also found in Hebrew, and so once again we're going to be reviewing what we know in Hebrew and applying it to Aramaic. You see on your screen 5 different examples of Aramaic words, and each of those words represents or has in it a spelling device or feature that we need to cover. In the first example, we see a nakna. Highlighted in red under the chet is what's called a silent schwa. Now that silent schwa does not appear in any of the vowel tables, but it is a symbol that you need to know for the study of Aramaic. In the second example, you'll see the word ba'el, and you'll see under the bait, highlighted in red, a vocal schwa. Now observe that the silent schwa and the vocal schwa are the same in form, but they have slightly different values. In the next chapter, we'll learn how to distinguish between the silent schwa and the vocal schwa. Back to the screen. In the next 2 examples, you're going to see 2 red consonants, and in each of those consonants, you're going to see a dot. In the first example, ba'el again, you're going to see a doggish lene in the bait or first root letter. And in the second example, you're going to see a doggish forte in the mem or second root letter, both of which are highlighted in red. Now, once again, you'll observe that the doggish lene and the doggish forte are identical in form, just a single dot. And they both appear in the middle of letters, so in the same position. In the next chapter, I'll teach you, or at least review with you, how to distinguish between a doggish forte and a doggish lene in a particular letter. It's important, but we won't do that until the next chapter. Finally, you'll see in the last example a red pathic under the final root letter. This red pathic is called the furtive pathic. Now, what makes this pathic different than the other pathic you've seen? A couple of things. First, the furtive pathic is always pronounced before the consonant with which it appears. Now, in every other situation and with every other vowel, the vowel is pronounced after the consonant with which it appears. In this one case, the furtive pathic is pronounced before the consonant with which it appears. So let's look at the example again. And here you have the form ruach, the word for spirit or wind. Listen carefully to my pronunciation, ruach. You will hear the A sound, ah, before my final guttural consonant, ch, ruach. It's not rucha, which is what we might expect, it's ruach. The furtive pathic will appear with only 2 letters in Aramaic, and both of those letters are gutturals, just like in Hebrew. When chet or ayin are the final letters in a word, and that final chet or ayin is not immediately preceded by an A-class vowel, the gutturals chet or ayin will just insert the furtive pathic into it to reinforce the pronunciation at the end. Now, in the example on the screen, you'll observe that the vowel before the guttural consonant chet is a shurik, a U-class vowel. Because the guttural chet is not preceded by the A-class vowel, it adds that A-class vowel, the furtive pathic. The furtive pathic does not count for syllabification, only for vocalization. And we use it in vocalization simply to reinforce the sound of the guttural at the end. Otherwise, as gutturals kind of lose their value because they're weak consonants, their pronunciation may have fallen off completely. And this is a way of maintaining and reinforcing that particular sound. So in some sense, the furtive pathic strengthens the guttural consonant so you get the full and robust pronunciation of it in your throat. The next item that we want to cover is something that's not the same in Hebrew and in Aramaic. One of the things you may have observed in your study of Hebrew is that the Hatef vowels are pretty much restricted to the guttural consonants. That is, they occur with guttural consonants where you might expect, for example, a vocal schwa. In Aramaic, we have that same phenomenon. That is, guttural consonants will take these Hatef vowels, not vocal schwa. But in addition to the guttural consonants, certain other consonants also prefer these Hatef vowels in Aramaic. Look at your screen with me. On your screen, you're going to see two sets of examples, an upper set and a lower set. In this first set up here, you're going to see that the Hatef vowels can appear before or after gimel or kof in a particular word. So look at the two examples on the right in this first row. You have sagar and kari. Notice the Hatef pathic located under the samik here, and the Hatef sagol located under the kof here. In Hebrew, you wouldn't see something like that. You'd see the regular vocal schwa. Look at the next set of examples below. You can also get these Hatef vowels before a lamed, a nun, or a resh in Aramaic. So with this first example, you'll see a Hatef sagol under the gimel, and in the second example, you'll see the Hatef pathic under the pei. Now here's the thing. It's not important that you memorize the exact environments in which these particular Hatef vowels are going to appear. When you encounter them, you just simply need to be aware of the fact that these are environments in which you see Hatef vowels that you wouldn't have expected them in Hebrew. For some students, this may trip them up. They may be asking themselves, why do I see it here? Why do I see it here? And the reason is to reinforce a particular sound with a particular consonant, and especially an original sound with what the vowel may have originally been. But none of that really matters in terms of your basic grasp of the language. What you need to know is that the Hatef vowels in Aramaic are not primarily restricted to the gutturals like they are in Hebrew. They can appear in more environments. And you just need to be aware of that so when you encounter it, you're not thrown off track. Another issue worth reviewing is the whole instance of the quiescent aleph. Now, a quiescent aleph is an aleph that is silent. That is, it normally appears in spelling, but it's never pronounced. Look at your screen with me. The point here is that in Aramaic, the quiescent aleph may drop out of a word. Now look at these two examples. In the first example above, we see the form la memar. Now the aleph that is highlighted in red is not pronounced. In fact, you can see unusually that there is no vowel symbol underneath it. One of the ways in which you can identify a quiescent aleph is you see an aleph without any vowel representation below it. That's the way you know it's quiescent or silent. Now look at your screen again with me and you'll notice this. I have two forms on the screen, la memar on top, and then below, la memar. Both forms are pronounced the exact same, and both forms mean the exact same thing, but they're spelled differently. In the first example, the quiescent aleph is present. In the second example, the quiescent aleph is absent. Now, this does happen a little bit in Hebrew, but it's much more common in Aramaic. So what you may have kind of a foggy memory of back in the Hebrew days is going to be something that you see much more commonly in Aramaic, so it's worth noting. The difficulty has to do with recognizing lexical forms or reconstructing verbal roots. You'll know from your study of Hebrew that one of the most difficult aspects of studying Hebrew or even now Aramaic verb morphology is that certain root letters are weak and they'd like to drop out. Well, an aleph is one of those guttural or weak root letters. And so sometimes it will change the spelling of a word, but even more, sometimes it will just drop out. Now when it drops out, you have to reconstruct it to know exactly what the word means in order to identify the verbal root. Look again with me at the screen. In the first example, it's easy to recognize the verbal root here, aleph, mem, resh, from the verb to say. But the second example, you only have two root letters remaining. And so it's a little more difficult to reconstruct the verbal root. Now, later you'll learn that the lamed in first position there is the preposition lamed, and the mem there marks the infinitive construct. Once you do that, you recognize you only have two root letters left and you need to reconstruct. Knowing that the aleph can drop out is one of the ways that can help you reconstruct verbal roots without going crazy. So far in our study of chapter 2, we've covered mostly things that Aramaic and Hebrew share in common. Before we move on, however, there are two items that we need to discuss that Aramaic and Hebrew don't share in common, or things that are actually true dialectical differences between the two languages. The first is the whole issue of the Canaanite shift. The Canaanite shift is something that happened in Hebrew, but not in Aramaic. Let me say that again. The Canaanite shift is something that happened in Hebrew, but not in Aramaic. Now, what is the Canaanite shift? The Canaanite shift is this. At a particular point in the language, all of the Canaanite dialects of Northwest Semitic, to which Hebrew belongs, had a fundamental shift from original long A to long O. That is this. Prior to what we know as Biblical Hebrew, many more of the words didn't have long O-class vowels in them. They had long A-class vowels in them. But at a certain time in the language, there was a shift from A to O, and that's the Canaanite shift. Once the Canaanite shift happened in Hebrew, a lot of the words that were originally spelled with A became spelled with O. Look at your screens with me. In this left-hand Hebrew column here, you will see about 7 words that are spelled with the holum vowel, the unchangeable or historical long O-class vowel. These words are enosh, door, tov, olam, kol, shalom, and shalosh. You will observe in each of the forms a red holum vowel. Now originally in Hebrew, before Biblical Hebrew, those were all A-class vowels, not O-class vowels. The Canaanite shifted them from A to O. But let's look at our screens again and see how they're spelled in Aramaic. Look at the same words in Aramaic. Anash, dar, tav, alam, kal, shalom, and talath. You'll see in each of those words not a long O, but a long A, not a holum wow, but the comets. Now what's happened is that Aramaic is not a Canaanite dialect, and so it did not undergo the Canaanite shift. Now why do we talk about this? We talk about this because one of the things you have to do with any language is memorize a truckload of vocabulary in order to read the language. Well, if you understand the Canaanite shift, you've just minimized your vocabulary memorization efforts tenfold. All of the words in the Hebrew column on the left that you'll see on your screen are related to the Aramaic words on the right. If you understand the difference between the Canaanite shift and the non-Canaanite shift forms, the O to the A, then you're going to see how these words are related, and you're going to be able to understand what their definitions are in their particular context. And so your vocabulary memorization is going to go on with much more ease than if otherwise you just memorized these and couldn't even understand how they related. Okay? So one of the things this does is it shows you how Aramaic and Hebrew are related, but also how they are slightly different. And one of the differences has to do with the Canaanite shift. In Hebrew and the Canaanite dialects, you have O-class vowels, and in Aramaic and in those dialects, you have A-class vowels. It's a slight change, but it's an important change. Finally, we encounter the whole issue of nasalization in Aramaic. Now, nasalization does not mean that Aramaic has a cold. Nasalization means Aramaic loves the noon or the N sound. Okay, nasalization is this. Frequently in Aramaic, you are going to see noons appearing where you would never expect them in Hebrew. Sometimes towards the beginning of a word, sometimes in the middle of a word, sometimes at the end of a word. Aramaic loves the noon, loves the N sound. So you're going to see it everywhere. You'll see it in verbs, in nouns, in pronominal suffixes. They love the noon. Look at your screen with me. In Aramaic, the consonant noon is frequently added to a word. And in certain environments, this is called nasalization. Now, if you think of nasal and N or noon, you'll get the connection. Look at the word here, manda. This is from the Hebrew word, or the Hebrew root, yod, dalet, ayin, which means to know. And so the word here, manda in Aramaic, or mada below in Hebrew, means knowledge. Notice the Hebrew word below, mada, spelled with a mem, a dalet, and an ayin, just like you would expect it. But look above, manda in Aramaic. Do you see that noon highlighted in red? That noon is there due to the influence of nasalization, or Aramaic's love of the noon. Now again, just like the Canaanite shift, the reason we study this is so that you can draw connections between Hebrew and Aramaic and build bridges. The more bridges you can build between the two languages, the easier it will be to learn Aramaic, and the better it will make your understanding and fluency in Hebrew as well. So we're kind of getting a 2-for-1 deal here. That's why I'm pretty cranky about learning these things well at the beginning. These small fundamental issues have big payoff, and the better you learn them and understand them now, the more benefit you get from it later, and you enjoy the language more. And if you enjoy the language more, you'll read and translate more in that particular language. So this brings us to the end of the lecture for Chapter 2, but before you move on, let's consider the following things. Look at your screens with me. Please, please, please review the vowel system. You don't want any gaps in your knowledge of this crucial information. Without understanding the vowel system, you won't be able to read Aramaic, and you won't be able to understand the grammatical function of a word in its context. Remember this from your study of Hebrew, that when the vowels change, the function of the word may change. Form and function go together oftentimes in Hebrew. And so knowing the vowels, knowing when they change, knowing how they change is very, very important. So you've got to know the vowels perfectly before you move on. Look again at your screen. When you focus your attention in this chapter, focus on the materials presented in 2.13, Aramaic vocalization and spelling. These are those items that are unique to Aramaic, that distinguish it from Hebrew, and that will move you on in your study. Begin by reviewing what you should know from Hebrew, and then crystallize what you need to learn that's new in this chapter. And by doing that, you're going to make your Hebrew better and your Aramaic better at the same time. So it's a great encouragement. You're getting this 2-for-1 benefit by mastering this material. That's the end of the lecture for Chapter 2. In our next lecture for Chapter 3, we'll cover Aramaic syllabification. That is how all these consonants and vowels work together to create sounds and syllables that are meaningful in the Aramaic language.